I know the exact moment Lorenzo Moretti sees me enter the ballroom, because the whiskey glass he'd been raising to his lips stops mid-motion, suspended in the air like time itself decided to pause for his shock. And even from across the crowded space filled with the city's most dangerous men in expensive suits, I can feel the weight of his stare tracking my every movement with an intensity that makes my skin prickle with awareness. I absolutely refuse to acknowledge his satisfaction. The dress I'm wearing cost more than my old car, and fits like it was designed specifically to make every man in this room forget how to breathe properly. All deep emerald silk that matches my eyes and a neckline that suggests rather than reveals, and I'd chosen it with deliberate calculation. Because tonight isn't about blending into the background like I spent my entire adolescence doing. Tonight is about making sure Lorenzo Moretti finally sees me as something other than the awkward girl who used to follow him around like a lost puppy, desperate for scraps of attention. Alessandro's hand is warm and steady on my lower back as he guides me into the ballroom with the easy confidence of someone who knows he's one of the most powerful men in the room. And I'm hyper-aware of the fact that walking in on the arm of Lorenzo's younger brother is either the smartest or stupidest decision I've made in my 23 years of existence. Alessandro had been the one to suggest attending together when I'd mentioned I had an invitation to the Moretti family's annual charity gala, his smile knowing and slightly wicked when he'd offered to be my escort. And I'd said yes because the alternative was showing up alone and looking like I was still pining after his older brother like some pathetic romantic. Minus, you're causing quite the stir, Bella. I don't think I've ever seen my brother look quite so murderous while holding expensive liquor. Alessandro's voice is amused as he leans close enough that his breath tickles my ear, and I force myself not to look in Lorenzo's direction, even though every nerve ending in my body is screaming at me to confirm what Alessandro is suggesting. Your brother doesn't care what I do or who I do it with. He made that abundantly clear when he set me up with his accountant 6 months ago, like I was a charity case that needed help finding a date. The memory of that particular humiliation still stings, despite the time that's passed. Lorenzo suggesting I might hit it off with his mild-mannered financial advisor because we were both quiet and enjoyed reading, like personality compatibility was determined by shared appreciation for books and social awkwardness. That was before you stopped being the girl he remembered and became the woman currently making every man in this room reconsider their relationship status. Alessandro's hand slides slightly lower on my back, a possessive gesture that's calculated to provoke rather than seduce. Us including me, for what it's worth. Alessandro, we talked about this. I'm not interested in being used as ammunition in whatever power struggle you're having with your brother. I keep my voice light despite the warning I'm delivering, because Alessandro Moretti is charming and handsome, and absolutely the type of man who would seduce someone just to prove a point to his older sibling. Who says I'm using you? Maybe I'm genuinely interested in the beautiful woman who grew up in our house, but somehow became interesting the moment she moved out and stopped looking at my brother like he hung the moon. Before I can respond to that dangerous statement, a presence appears beside us that makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up with awareness, and I don't need to turn my head to know that Lorenzo has crossed the entire ballroom to interrupt whatever conversation he thinks we're having. Alessandro, Father wants to speak with you about the shipment issue. Apparently, it can't wait until after the charity speeches. Lorenzo's voice is carefully controlled in that way he has when he's absolutely furious, but refusing to show it publicly. And when I finally make myself look at him directly, I'm unprepared for the impact of his dark eyes fixed on me with an intensity that feels almost physical. The shipment can wait. I'm occupied at the moment. Alessandro's tone is deliberately casual, his hand remaining firmly planted on my back in a gesture of territorial claim that's entirely for his brother's benefit. I'm with my guest, which makes me wonder if you're having trouble finding your own date, or if you've suddenly developed an interest in charity cases. The words come out sharper than I intended. Years of suppressed hurt and rejection bubbling up despite my best efforts to maintain the sophisticated composure I'd carefully constructed for tonight. And I watch something flicker in Lorenzo's expression that might be surprise or pain before his usual mask of controlled indifference slides back into place. Interesting choice of words considering you were never a charity case, Gianna, though I'm starting to think my attempts to help you navigate social situations might have been misguided if this is the gratitude I receive. Your attempts to help me were you treating me like a little sister who needed managing, not like a woman capable of making her own decisions about who deserves my time and attention. I'm aware we're starting to draw glances from nearby guests, that two of the city's most powerful mob princes having a tense conversation with a woman who grew up in their household is exactly the kind of gossip these events thrive on. Then by all means, continue making your decisions. I wouldn't dream of interfering with your evening. Lorenzo's smile doesn't reach his eyes as he looks at his brother with something cold and calculating. Though I would suggest being careful about the company you keep, Alessandro has a tendency to lose interest once the novelty wears off. Whereas you never showed interest in the first place, which honestly seems worse than losing it eventually. The words are out before I can stop them. Years of watching him cycle through beautiful women, while treating me like furniture coming to a head in this crowded ballroom, where I'm supposed to be demonstrating how completely over him I am. Didn't I, though? Maybe you weren't paying attention? His voice drops lower, intimate despite the public setting, and suddenly he's standing closer than protocol allows, invading the space between Alessandro and me with deliberate intent. Maybe you were so busy deciding I saw you as a sister that you missed all the times I had to actively work to maintain that distance. The confession hits like a physical blow, rewriting every memory I have of our interactions through a lens I never considered, and I'm opening my mouth to demand explanation when Alessandro steps between us with tension radiating from every line of his body. And this conversation is over. You're making a scene and embarrassing her, which I'm sure wasn't your intention when you stormed over here like a jealous ex-boyfriend. I'm not her ex-boyfriend. I'm someone who's known her since she was 14, and finds it extremely concerning that my younger brother is suddenly interested the moment she walks in looking like that. Lorenzo gestures vaguely at my dress, my appearance, the entire package I'd carefully assembled to prove I was worth noticing. I'm looking like what exactly? Like a woman instead of the girl you've spent years overlooking. My voice sounds foreign even to my own ears, confident in a way I've never managed around Lorenzo. Maybe the problem isn't Alessandro's sudden interest. Maybe the problem is you finally noticing what was in front of you the entire time, and realizing you had every opportunity to do something about it but chose not to. The silence that follows is thick with implication and unspoken history, and I watch Lorenzo's jaw clench with that particular tightness that means he's processing something he doesn't want to feel, struggling with emotions he's spent years pretending don't exist. This isn't the place for this conversation. Then don't start conversations you're not prepared to finish. I step back from both of them, suddenly desperate for space and air and distance from whatever complicated dynamic I've walked myself into. Excuse me, I need some air. I move toward the terrace doors before either of them can stop me, and I'm almost through the exit when Lorenzo's hand catches my wrist with careful pressure, not restraining but definitely stopping my escape. Gianna, wait. Why? So you can tell me more about how you were protecting me from yourself by pushing me away. Or maybe you want to explain how watching you with other women for years was somehow for my own good. I turn to face him fully, and this close I can see the conflict in his expression. The war between control and desire playing out in real time. And I want to tell you that seeing you walk in here with Alessandro made me want to do extremely violent things to my own brother, and that terrifies me more than I'm willing to admit. Good. Maybe terror will teach you what years of indifference taught me, which is that wanting something from a distance doesn't mean you deserve it when you finally decide to reach for it. I pull my wrist free and disappear onto the terrace, leaving him standing there in the doorway watching me go. And as the cool night air hits my heated skin, I realize this is only the beginning of whatever complicated disaster we're walking into together. Chapter 2. When she was just the awkward girl. Standing on the terrace trying to catch my breath and slow my racing heart, I can't help but be pulled back to the first time Lorenzo Moretti noticed I existed, which was 12 years ago when I was 14 and crying in the library of his family's estate because some boy from my high school had told me I was too plain and bookish to ever be worth dating. I'd been living with the Morettis for 3 months by then after my parents died in a car accident, and their family took me in because my father had worked security for the organization, and loyalty extended to caring for the orphans of fallen soldiers. And I'd been doing my best to stay invisible and grateful and not make waves in a household that already had enough drama without adding my teenage heartbreak to the mix. Lorenzo had been 22 then, just back from university, and already being groomed to take over the family business from his father. All sharp suits and sharper intelligence with a parade of beautiful women who looked like they belonged in magazines rather than real life. He'd found me in the library that afternoon when he was looking for some business document his father needed, and I can still remember the exact expression on his face when he saw me there with tears streaming down my cheeks and my nose red from crying. Something between concern and awkwardness that suggested he had no idea how to handle emotional teenage girls, but was going to try anyway, because ignoring me seemed cruel. Hey, what's wrong? Did something happen at school? He'd sat down in the chair across from me with careful distance, not touching but present in a way that made me feel less alone with my embarrassment and pain. It's stupid. I'm being dramatic about something that doesn't matter. I'd tried to wipe away the tears and compose myself, because crying in front of Lorenzo Moretti felt like the ultimate humiliation when he already had to live with the charity case his family had taken in. If it made you cry, then it matters, at least enough to talk about it. His voice had been gentle in a way I'd never heard from him before, patient like he actually cared about whatever teenage problem had reduced me to tears in his father's library. So I'd told him, word for word, what that boy had said about how I was too serious and too plain, and how no guy would ever want someone who spent Friday nights reading instead of partying. And I'd watched Lorenzo's expression shift from concern to something darker that might have been anger on my behalf. That boy is an idiot who doesn't recognize value when it's directly in front of him. And someday, when you're older and more confident, you're going to meet someone who appreciates intelligence and substance over superficial flash. He'd leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, meeting my eyes with an intensity that made my 14-year-old heart do complicated things I didn't understand yet. You're not plain, Gianna. You're understated, which is completely different and far more interesting in the long run. You're just saying that because you feel sorry for me. I'm saying it because it's true, and because in a few years when you finish growing into yourself, you're going to be the kind of woman who stops traffic without even trying. He'd reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear with surprising gentleness. Trust me on this. I know beautiful women when I see them, and you're going to be devastating once you figure out what you've got. That had been the moment I'd fallen completely and hopelessly in love with Lorenzo Moretti, sitting in that library with his hand still hovering near my face and his dark eyes looking at me like I might actually be worth something beyond charity and obligation. I'd spent the next 8 years watching him from a distance, learning everything about him, memorizing his preferences and his patterns, hoping desperately that someday he'd look at me again with that same intensity and see what I'd become instead of what I used to be. But he never did, or at least he never acted on it in any way I could recognize, and instead, I watched him cycle through women who looked nothing like me, all long legs and confidence and easy sensuality that I couldn't figure out how to emulate no matter how hard I tried. He'd been protective in that big brother way that made me want to scream, offering advice on dealing with difficult professors, and warning away guys he deemed unworthy while never once considering that maybe I didn't want his brotherly protection. Maybe I wanted him to see me as someone who could stand beside him instead of someone who needed shielding from the world. The worst had been 2 years ago at Alessandro's birthday party, when I'd finally worked up the courage to tell Lorenzo how I felt, wearing a dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion and practicing my speech for weeks until I had it memorized perfectly. I'd found him in his father's study where he'd escaped the party for a phone call, and I'd waited for him to finish before launching into my carefully prepared confession about how I'd been in love with him since I was 14, and how I thought maybe if he just gave me a chance, he'd see that we could be good together. He'd looked at me with something close to pity mixed with gentle rejection, his hand coming up to squeeze my shoulder in a gesture that was meant to be comforting, but felt patronizing. Gianna, you're like a sister to me. You know that, right? I care about you too much to risk our relationship by crossing lines that shouldn't be crossed. But what if I want those lines crossed? What if I'm willing to risk the relationship for the possibility of something more? You're 21, and you've lived here your whole adult life. You don't know what you want, because you haven't experienced anything outside this world. He'd been so certain, so absolutely convinced, that my feelings were just familiarity and proximity, rather than genuine desire. I think you're confusing gratitude and comfort with romantic feelings, and I'm not going to take advantage of that confusion. I'd left that study feeling smaller and more foolish than the 14-year-old who'd cried over a boy calling her plain, and I'd spent the next 2 years avoiding Lorenzo as much as possible while working on transforming myself into someone he couldn't possibly dismiss as confused or grateful. I'd moved out of the estate into my own apartment, started working in legitimate business rather than anything connected to the family, and spent time and money becoming the kind of woman who turned heads and commanded attention instead of fading into backgrounds. You're thinking about the past. I can tell by the way you're gripping that railing like you're trying to strangle it. Alessandro's voice pulls me back to the present, and I find him leaning against the terrace doorway with a champagne flute in each hand, offering me one with a knowing smile. Let me guess. Remembering all the times my idiot brother treated you like a child instead of seeing what was right in front of him. Your brother saw exactly what he wanted to see, which was someone safe to project his protective instincts onto without risking actual emotional vulnerability. I take the champagne and drink half of it in one long swallow that's probably not how expensive champagne is meant to be consumed. He's out there right now, having what looks like a very intense internal crisis. Keeps staring at the door like he's deciding whether coming after you is worth whatever consequences following that impulse would create. Alessandro moves to stand beside me at the railing, close but not touching. For what it's worth, I think he's always known you were special. He's just been too much of a coward to do anything about it, because admitting he wants you would mean admitting he's capable of losing control. And you, what's your angle in all this? Because I don't believe for a second that you're helping me out of pure altruistic brotherly concern. My angle is that I genuinely find you fascinating, and watching my brother realize he's been an idiot for the better part of a decade is entertaining bonus content. His smile is sharp and honest in a way that's almost refreshing. Plus, there's something appealing about a woman who spent years being overlooked, suddenly having the power to bring the great Lorenzo Moretti to his knees with one dress and a well-timed entrance. I'm not trying to bring anyone to their knees. I'm trying to move on with my life without being defined by unrequited feelings for someone who made it clear I wasn't what he wanted. And yet here you are, at his family's event, wearing a dress that was clearly chosen to make him regret every decision he's ever made regarding you. Before I can argue with that uncomfortably accurate assessment, Lorenzo himself appears in the doorway, and the look on his face when he sees Alessandro standing close to me is pure murder barely restrained by years of self-control and family loyalty. My Alessandro, Father's looking for you. Something about the East Side territory dispute that apparently can't wait. Tell Father I'm occupied. He knows how to handle territory disputes without my input. Now, Alessandro. The command in Lorenzo's voice is absolute, the tone of someone who's used to being obeyed without question, and I watch the silent battle of wills play out between brothers who clearly have their own complicated dynamic that exists entirely separate from my presence. Alessandro sighs dramatically, but moves toward the door, pausing to press a kiss to my cheek that's clearly designed to provoke his brother. Save me a dance later, Bella. I want to see if you move as well as you look. Then it's just Lorenzo and me on the terrace with tension thick enough to cut. And I force myself to meet his eyes even though every instinct is screaming at me to run before this conversation can wound me any deeper than I've already been hurt. Ona, you're playing a dangerous game, using my brother to make me jealous. I'm not playing anything. I'm living my life. And if that makes you uncomfortable, then maybe you should examine why you suddenly care who I spend time with, when you've spent years making it clear you don't see me that way. I never said I don't see you that way. I said you were like a sister, which was a lie I told to protect both of us from something I knew I couldn't handle responsibly. Chapter 3. The glow-up that becomes a weapon. His confession hangs in the air between us like a grenade with the pin pulled, and I force myself to process what he just admitted while keeping my expression carefully neutral because showing Lorenzo Moretti how much his words affect me has never worked in my favor before, and I'm not about to start giving him that power now when I've spent 2 years building walls specifically designed to keep him out. A lie you told to protect us both. That's a convenient reframe of rejection that makes you sound noble instead of cowardly. I set down my champagne glass with deliberate precision, channeling every ounce of the confidence I've spent years cultivating. But let's be clear about what actually happened. I offered you something real and vulnerable, and you decided it was safer to dismiss it as confused gratitude, rather than risk admitting you might actually want something you couldn't control. You were 21 and living under my family's roof. Taking advantage of that situation would have made me exactly the kind of man I've spent my life trying not to become. He moves closer with that predatory grace that used to make my knees weak and still does despite my best efforts to remain unaffected. So yes, I lied. I called you a sister when what I really wanted was to lock you in my room and make sure no other man ever looked at you the way I did. And yet somehow you managed to resist that urge for 2 whole years while I watched you parade women through your life who were everything I wasn't. Those women were distractions. Attempts to convince myself that what I felt for you was just misplaced protective instinct, rather than something darker and more complicated. His hand comes up to grip the railing beside me, effectively caging me in without actually touching. Clearly, that strategy was less successful than I'd hoped, given that seeing you tonight in that dress with my brother's hand on your back made me want to commit violence. You don't get to be jealous. You lost that right when you decided I wasn't worth the risk of complications. I duck under his arm and move away, because staying this close to him while he's admitting things I've waited years to hear is dangerous to the composure I need to maintain. I'm not the same girl who cried in your library or confessed her feelings in your father's study. I don't need your protection or your belated realization that maybe I was worth more than brotherly affection. No, you're not the same girl. You're the woman I knew you'd become, except somehow more devastating than I imagined possible. His voice follows me across the terrace, low and rough with emotion he's barely containing. And watching you walk away from me is significantly harder than pushing you away ever was. Then maybe you should have thought about that before spending years making me feel invisible while you figured out your emotional damage. I move back toward the ballroom because this conversation is heading somewhere dangerous, and I'm not ready to forgive him just because he's finally saying things I wanted to hear when I was too young to know better than to believe them. The party has shifted into full swing by the time I return. Music and dancing, and dangerous men conducting business under the guise of charity. And I'm immediately intercepted by Alessandro, who appears with perfect timing, and a knowing smile that suggests he's been watching the terrace door waiting for my return. That looked intense. Should I be concerned that my brother is about to do something dramatically stupid, or is he still in the denial phase of his emotional crisis? Your brother is in the making declarations phase, which is somehow worse than denial because now I have to deal with the fact that he's finally admitting feelings while still being fundamentally the same person who hurt me. I accept the fresh champagne he offers, because apparently drinking is my coping mechanism for this entire evening. So you don't believe him. You think he's just reacting to seeing you with me, rather than genuinely recognizing what he's been running from. I think he's jealous and possessive and used to getting what he wants. And right now what he wants is to win a competition he's decided exists between you. And if I told you I'm genuinely interested in spending time with you regardless of whether it makes my brother lose his mind, would you believe that, or assume I'm also just playing games? Alessandro's question catches me off guard, because his tone is serious rather than playful. And when I look at him properly, I see something in his expression that might actually be authentic interest, rather than strategic manipulation. And I'd say that's a complication I'm not equipped to handle right now, when I'm still processing the first complication. Fair enough. Though for what it's worth, I think you underestimate how much power you have in this situation. He gestures toward where Lorenzo is standing across the ballroom, attempting to look engaged in conversation with business associates while his attention is clearly fixed on us. Look at him. He can't stop watching you. Can't stop tracking your every movement like he's afraid you'll disappear if he looks away. That's not power. That's just him finally noticing what was always there and panicking about the fact that I'm not waiting around for him to figure out what he wants. Exactly. Which is why you hold all the cards right now. He wants something he can't have, and you get to decide whether he suffers or succeeds. Alessandro spins me into a dance position as a new song starts, pulling me onto the floor with the kind of confidence that comes from growing up in a world where everything is a power play. The question is whether you're cruel enough to make him work for it, or soft enough to give in the moment he shows real vulnerability. I'm undecided. Ask me again after I've had more champagne and less emotional whiplash. We dance, and I'm hyper-aware of Lorenzo's eyes burning into us from across the room. Of the way Alessandro's hands are respectfully placed but still possessive enough to send a message, of how complicated this entire situation has become in the span of a few hours. He's going to cut in, probably in the next 30 seconds if the vein throbbing in his forehead is any indication. Alessandro's voice is amused against my ear. When he does, I want you to remember that you owe him nothing, that any ground you give is a gift he doesn't deserve yet. Why are you helping me? What do you actually gain from antagonizing your brother this way? Maybe I'm helping because I like you and think you deserve better than years of unrequited longing. Or maybe I'm helping because watching Lorenzo lose control is entertaining. His smile is sharp. Or maybe it's both. Complex motivations are allowed. Sure enough, Lorenzo appears beside us with murder in his eyes, barely masked by social propriety, his hand already extended toward me in a demand rather than a request. May I cut in, or are you too occupied with whatever game you're playing? Games require two players, brother. I'm simply dancing with a beautiful woman who happens to enjoy my company. Alessandro releases me with deliberate slowness, pressing another kiss to my hand that's pure theatrical provocation. Save me another dance later, Gianna. I find I'm not quite finished enjoying your company. Then Lorenzo's hand is on my waist, pulling me closer than the dance requires. And suddenly the entire ballroom fades into background noise, while we move together with a familiarity that comes from years of existing in the same space, even if we were never actually together. He's trying to make me lose control. You understand that, right? This entire evening is Alessandro pushing buttons he knows will make me react. Or maybe Alessandro is genuinely interested, and you're just now realizing that other men see what you spent years pretending didn't exist. I never pretended. I actively fought against it because wanting you felt wrong when you were supposed to be under my protection. His hand tightens on my waist, pulling me incrementally closer. But watching my brother touch you is making me reconsider every noble intention I've ever had about doing the right thing. Noble intentions that left me alone and hurt, while you congratulated yourself on being honorable. Forgive me if I'm not impressed by your sudden crisis of conscience now that someone else is interested. You want me to grovel, want me to admit I was wrong and stupid, and every other thing you've probably called me in your head for the past 2 years. His voice drops lower, intimate despite the public setting. Fine. I was all of those things and worse. I hurt you because I was too much of a coward to risk the one genuine thing in my life, and now I'm watching you slip away while I finally figure out what I should have known from the moment you walked into that library at 14. And what's that? What revelation are you having that's so earth-shattering it required me showing up with your brother to finally break through? That you were never invisible to me. I just convinced myself you were, because the alternative was admitting I wanted something I had no right to take. Chapter 4. He pursues. She retreats. The days following the ball are a study in Lorenzo Moretti, trying to act like a man, who suddenly discovered emotions and has no idea how to process them without his usual cold calculation and strategic planning, which would be almost endearing if I wasn't still raw from years of being treated like furniture that occasionally needed dusting. He shows up at my apartment the morning after with coffee and pastries from the bakery. I mentioned loving once in passing 3 years ago, which means he's been paying attention even when I thought he wasn't, and I almost slammed the door in his face on principle before curiosity about what he possibly thinks he can say to fix this wins out over self-preservation. I brought breakfast. Also an apology that I've been practicing since 4 this morning when I gave up on sleep, and accepted that I'm not going to be able to function until we talk about everything I've been too stupid to say for the past 8 years. He's still in what looks like yesterday's suit, minus the jacket and tie, hair disheveled in a way I've never seen on him, and the exhaustion in his eyes suggests he's telling the truth about the sleepless night. A coffee and pastries don't undo years of rejection, Lorenzo. They're just expensive props in whatever performance you've decided to give about suddenly caring now that someone else might want what you spent years throwing away. I don't move from blocking my doorway because letting him into my space feels like surrendering ground I've fought too hard to claim. You're right. They don't undo anything. But I'm hoping they might buy me enough time to explain, without you slamming the door before I can finish my carefully prepared speech. His smile is self-deprecating in a way that's unfamiliar, and therefore somehow more dangerous than his usual confidence. Mus, I've been told I'm much more tolerable when people are eating my bribery pastries. Who told you that? One of the many women you dated while I was supposedly invisible. Alessandro, actually. During one of his lectures about how I'm an emotionally constipated idiot who's going to die alone surrounded by money and regret. He shifts the coffee and bag to one hand so he can run the other through his already messy hair. Now he's been surprisingly invested in making sure I understand exactly how badly I've handled everything regarding you. I think he's enjoying having moral high ground for once. Your brother is enjoying watching you squirm because you've spent your entire life being in control and now you're not. It has nothing to do with morality and everything to do with entertainment value. I reach for the coffee because I'm not actually strong enough to turn down good coffee, regardless of who's offering it. And I watch Lorenzo's expression shift into something that might be hope when I accept his peace offering. And so you'll let me in. Let me attempt to explain myself before you make final decisions about whether I'm worth forgiving. I'll let you in because I want answers, and you clearly won't leave until you've delivered your prepared speech. But don't mistake hospitality for forgiveness. I step aside finally, and he enters my small apartment that's nothing like the luxury of his estate, looking around with obvious interest at the space I've built for myself, away from his family's shadow. And it suits you, this place. All warm colors and books and the kind of personal touches that make it actually feel like a home instead of just expensive real estate. He sets the pastries on my small kitchen counter with care, like he's trying not to disrupt the space I've created. I always wondered where you went when you moved out, what kind of place you'd choose when you finally had the freedom to make it entirely yours. You could have visited any time in the past 2 years, instead of pretending I didn't exist beyond polite acknowledgement at family events. I stayed away because seeing you and not being able to touch you was becoming impossible, and I convinced myself that distance would make the wanting stop. He leans against my counter with his hands gripping the edge like he needs something to hold on to. Obviously, that strategy was spectacularly unsuccessful, given that I'm currently in your apartment at 7 in the morning, having not slept because I can't stop thinking about Alessandro's hands on you. Alessandro barely touched me. We danced at a public event, and he was completely respectful despite your jealous imagination creating scenarios that didn't happen. I'm aware, which somehow makes it worse because it means I'm not even jealous of what happened. I'm jealous of the possibility of what could happen if he decides to seriously pursue you. And if he does decide to pursue me, why would that be any of your business when you made it very clear 2 years ago that you weren't interested in being anything beyond my protective big brother figure? Because I lied. Because every single time I said you were like a sister, I was actually thinking extremely non-brotherly things that would have gotten me arrested if I'd acted on them when you were living under my roof. His voice has gone rough with frustration and what sounds like genuine distress. You want honesty? Fine. I've been attracted to you since you were 18, and it terrified me because you were supposed to be safe. You were supposed to be the one person in my life who wasn't contaminated by violence and manipulation and all the darkness I swim in daily. So your solution was to make me feel like I wasn't good enough, instead of just being honest about your feelings like an adult. My solution was to protect you from me, from my world, from the fact that being connected to me in any romantic capacity would paint a target on your back that I wasn't willing to risk. He moves closer, but stops himself before actually touching me, hands flexing at his sides like he's physically restraining the impulse. But then you moved out and started building a life separate from the family, and I realized the target existed anyway because you grew up in my house, and everyone knows you're important to us, which meant I'd sacrificed our happiness for safety you didn't actually have. That sounds like a convenient realization that coincidentally arrived right around the same time Alessandro showed interest. Alessandro showing interest was the catalyst, not the cause. It made me confront the fact that I was going to have to watch you build a life with someone else because I'd been too much of a coward to risk rejection and vulnerability. Before I can respond, my phone buzzes with a text that I glance at reflexively, and Lorenzo's eyes track the movement with predatory focus before his expression goes carefully blank in that way that means he's processing something he doesn't like. Let me guess. My brother checking to see if you survived my inevitable morning visit. Alessandro is checking to see if I want to have lunch later this week, which is none of your business and not something you get to have opinions about. Except it is my business, because he's my brother, and you're the woman I've been in love with since before I had the vocabulary to name what I was feeling. The confession comes out harsh and unpolished, nothing like the smooth declaration I'm sure he'd planned. So yes, I have opinions about him pursuing you. Specifically that I'd rather cut off my own hand than watch it happen while I do nothing. You don't get to declare love after years of rejection and expect that to erase the damage, Lorenzo. Love without action is just pretty words that mean nothing when the person saying them has proven repeatedly that their feelings don't translate into choosing you. Then let me choose you now. Let me prove that I'm capable of being what you needed me to be when you were brave enough to tell me how you felt. He does close the distance then, hands coming up to frame my face with a gentleness that contradicts the intensity in his eyes. I'm not asking you to forget. I'm asking for the chance to build new memories that might eventually outweigh the bad ones. And what happens when the novelty wears off and you remember all the reasons you convinced yourself this was a bad idea? What happens when protecting me starts feeling like a burden instead of a privilege? Then you walk away and I live with the consequences of failing you twice. But at least we'll both know I tried instead of spending the rest of our lives wondering what if. His thumb strokes across my cheekbone, and I'm dangerously close to forgetting why letting him back in is a terrible idea when my apartment door buzzes with someone at the main entrance, and Lorenzo's hands drop immediately as tension floods back into his shoulders. Are you expecting someone? Alessandro said he might stop by with those files I needed for work. The look on Lorenzo's face would be funny if the situation wasn't so complicated. Pure frustration mixed with resignation that his brother has perfect timing for ruining moments. Of course he did, because why would my attempt at reconciliation happen without Alessandro's interference? Chapter 5. The Brother in the Middle of Fire. I buzz Alessandro in because refusing would only make this situation more awkward than it already is, and I watch Lorenzo's jaw clench with barely contained frustration as his brother's footsteps echo up the stairs toward my apartment. The tension in my small living space is suffocating. Two Moretti brothers in close quarters with me standing between them both literally and figuratively, and I'm starting to understand why people say you should never get involved with family because the complications multiply exponentially when blood and desire intersect. Alessandro enters with his usual confident charm, taking in the scene of Lorenzo disheveled in yesterday's clothes and me still in pajamas with knowing amusement that suggests he'd timed this interruption perfectly. Good morning. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Though based on the tension I could feel from the hallway, I'm guessing my timing is as impeccable as ever. Your timing is shit, and you know it. You're deliberately sabotaging my attempt to have an actual conversation with Gianna. Lorenzo's voice is cold with the kind of controlled anger that makes most people step back. But Alessandro just grins wider like he's enjoying his brother's discomfort immensely. I'm delivering work files she requested yesterday. If your conversation is more important than her professional obligations, then by all means continue and I'll wait. Alessandro moves into the kitchen area with easy familiarity, helping himself to one of the pastries Lorenzo brought. These are excellent, by the way. Did you actually remember her favorite bakery, or did you have someone research it? Get out, Alessandro. This doesn't concern you, and your transparent attempts to interfere are both obvious and juvenile. What's juvenile is you showing up at her apartment after years of neglect and expecting her to forgive you because you finally figured out what everyone else has known since she was 16. Alessandro's tone shifts from amused to serious, and I realize with uncomfortable clarity that this isn't just strategic maneuvering on his part. He's genuinely angry on my behalf. Once she deserves better than your belated emotional awakening. She deserves someone who's known her worth from the beginning, instead of someone who needed jealousy as a catalyst. And you think you're that someone. You think 3 days of attention makes you more deserving than 8 years of history. I think 8 years of rejection outweigh 8 years of proximity, and I think she's smart enough to recognize the difference between someone who wants her and someone who wants to win. Both of you need to stop talking about me like I'm not standing right here. My voice cuts through their argument with more force than I intended, years of being discussed instead of included finally hitting a breaking point. I'm not a prize to be won or a territory to be claimed in whatever power struggle you're having. I'm a person who gets to make her own decisions about who deserves her time and energy. They both turn to look at me with identical expressions of chagrin that would be funny if I wasn't so frustrated with the entire situation. And I watch Alessandro's face shift into something more genuine and less performative. You're right. I apologize for speaking about you like you're not here making your own choices. He sets down the pastry and moves closer with hands raised in surrender. But I stand by what I said about Lorenzo needing jealousy to finally see what was always there, and I stand by my own interest in getting to know you better if you're willing to give me that chance. Your interest in me is at least 50% about antagonizing your brother. Don't pretend this is purely about my irresistible personality. 60% antagonism, 40% genuine attraction. I'm nothing if not honest about my complicated motivations. His smile is disarming in its self-awareness. But that 40% is real, Gianna. I'm not just playing games even if I'm enjoying the side effect of watching Lorenzo lose his carefully constructed control. This is insane. You're seriously considering dating him just to punish me for being an idiot. Lorenzo's voice has risen slightly. That legendary control starting to crack under the pressure of watching his brother make moves he should have made years ago. I'm considering keeping my options open while you figure out if your feelings are real or just possessive panic about losing something you thought would always be available. My feelings are real. They've always been real. I just buried them under layers of duty and protection, and convincing myself that wanting you was selfish. And now suddenly wanting me is acceptable because what? I changed my appearance and your brother showed interest. Those are really compelling reasons to trust that this time will be different. Those things made me confront what I'd been running from, but they didn't create the feelings. They just forced me to acknowledge them. He moves toward me despite Alessandro's presence. Drawn by some invisible pull, he's clearly stopped trying to resist. I know I don't deserve another chance. I know I've burned through any goodwill you had toward me, but I'm asking anyway, because the alternative is watching you build something with someone else while I regret every moment of cowardice that brought us here. Lorenzo, I need you to be very clear about something. Alessandro's voice has gone serious in a way I've never heard from him. All traces of amusement gone. If you're doing this because you can't stand losing to me, if this is about ego and competition rather than genuine feeling for her, you need to walk away now before you hurt her worse than you already have. This has nothing to do with you, and everything to do with the fact that I've been in love with her for years, and was too much of a coward to risk the safety of keeping her at a distance. Lorenzo's attention shifts to his brother with intensity that makes the air feel charged. So yes, seeing her with you made me insane with jealousy. But that jealousy just highlighted what was already there. It didn't create it. Then prove it. Prove that you're capable of choosing her over duty and protection, and all the excuses you've used to keep her away. Alessandro crosses his arms with challenge clear in his posture. Because I'm not stepping back just because you've suddenly decided to join the competition. If you want her, you're going to have to actually fight for her, instead of expecting her to wait around while you process your emotional damage. I'm not waiting around for anyone. I'm going to work, and you're both going to leave so I can have space to think without two Moretti brothers filling my apartment with testosterone and unresolved sibling dynamics. I grab my phone and the files Alessandro brought, needing distance from both of them before I do something stupid like actually believing Lorenzo's declarations or falling for Alessandro's charm. Gianna? Wait. No, Lorenzo. You wait. You've had years to figure this out, and I'm done putting my life on hold while you decide if I'm worth the risk. I move toward my bedroom to change for work, pausing at the door to look at both of them. When you figure out if this is real or just ego, you know where to find me. Until then, I'm going to live my life and see what happens without treating your emotional journey as my primary concern. I close the bedroom door on whatever response they might have, and through the wall, I can hear the low murmur of their continued argument. Two brothers fighting over something neither of them has any right to claim until I decide they've earned it. Chapter 6. The Night That Shouldn't Happen. 3 days of radio silence from both Moretti brothers feels like a gift and a curse simultaneously. The peace allowing me to actually focus on work without testosterone-fueled drama, while the quiet also gives me too much time to replay every conversation and confession until I can't tell what's real versus what's strategic manipulation. I'm working late at the office because going home means sitting alone with my thoughts, and I don't hear Lorenzo enter until his reflection appears in my computer screen, standing in the doorway of my small office like he's been there for a while just watching me work. You're going to give yourself eye strain staring at that screen in the dark. Also, your security downstairs is terrible if they let me walk right up without calling ahead. His voice is quieter than usual, missing the edge of command that typically characterizes every word. And when I finally turn to look at him properly, I see exhaustion written across his features that suggests the silence has been as difficult for him as it has been for me. I mean, what are you doing here? I thought I made it clear that I needed space to think without you hovering and making declarations. You did, which is why I've been staying away, even though every instinct I have has been screaming at me to show up and demand you listen to more apologies. He moves into the office slowly, closing the door behind him with a quiet click that makes the space feel suddenly smaller and more intimate. But I'm here now because 3 days of trying to respect your boundaries has taught me that I'm significantly worse at patience than I thought. And because Alessandro mentioned he's taking you to dinner tomorrow, which made me realize waiting politely might mean waiting forever. So you're here to stake your claim before your brother has a chance to actually follow through on his interest. That's exactly the kind of possessive nonsense I told you I wasn't interested in entertaining. I'm here because I miss you. Because 3 days without seeing you or talking to you has been harder than 2 years of pretending I didn't want you. He stops a few feet away, maintaining distance like he's trying to prove he can respect boundaries, even when everything about his body language suggests he wants to close the gap. And yes, knowing Alessandro is taking you to dinner makes me want to do violent things. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because I can't stay away anymore, regardless of strategic timing or brotherly competition. You can't just show up whenever the waiting gets hard and expect me to drop everything to manage your feelings. I have work to finish and a life to live that doesn't revolve around your emotional schedule. I turn back to my computer because looking at him is dangerous when he's being vulnerable and honest instead of cold and controlled, and I hear him move closer until he's standing right behind my chair with his hands resting on the back near my shoulders. Then tell me to leave. Tell me you don't want me here, and I'll walk out and leave you alone to finish your work and prepare for your dinner with my brother. His voice is close enough that I can feel his breath against my hair. But if you can't tell me to leave, if there's even a small part of you that wants me to stay, then let me be here while you work. Let me prove I can exist in your space without demanding anything beyond your presence. The problem is, I can't tell him to leave, despite every logical reason. I have to protect myself from getting hurt again, I can't make the words form, because some traitorous part of me has been waiting for him to show up exactly like this, stripped of his usual armor and admitting things that make him vulnerable instead of powerful. You can stay, but you have to be quiet because I actually need to finish this report before tomorrow. I can be quiet. He settles into the chair across from my desk, long legs stretched out and arms crossed over his chest in a posture that suggests he's prepared to wait as long as necessary. And I try to focus on my work while hyper-aware of his presence filling my small office with tension that has nothing to do with the financial reports I'm supposed to be analyzing. An hour passes in silence, broken only by typing and the occasional rustle of Lorenzo shifting position, and I'm almost successful at forgetting he's there until I feel his eyes on me with that particular intensity that makes my skin prickle. And when I look up, I find him watching me with an expression I can't quite read that might be longing or regret or possibly both. And what? Nothing, just realizing how many hours I could have spent exactly like this over the years if I hadn't been so determined to keep you at a distance. Watching me work on boring financial reports, you have very low standards for quality time. Watching you exist in your element, seeing the way you bite your lip when you're concentrating, or how you push your hair back when you're frustrated with numbers that won't balance. His voice has gone soft with something that sounds dangerously close to affection. I've missed so much by convincing myself that staying away was noble instead of just cowardly. Lorenzo, don't do this. Don't make me feel things when I'm trying to maintain perspective about how badly you've hurt me. I'm not trying to make you feel anything. I'm just being honest about my regrets, because keeping them inside hasn't worked, and I'm out of strategies for managing what I feel when I'm near you. He stands and moves around the desk before I can stop him, spinning my chair to face him and crouching down, so we're at eye level with his hands resting on my armrests, effectively caging me in without actually touching. And tell me you don't feel it too. Tell me this tension between us is one-sided, and I'll walk away right now and accept that I destroyed something I can't rebuild. I can't tell you that because it would be a lie, but feeling something doesn't mean acting on it is smart or healthy. Since when have either of us cared about smart or healthy where the other is concerned? You loved me when it was guaranteed to hurt you, and I pushed you away when it was guaranteed to destroy me. His hand comes up finally, fingers threading through my hair with a gentleness that makes my breath catch. Maybe it's time we both stop trying to be smart and just admit what we want. And what do you want, specifically, because vague declarations aren't enough anymore. I want you. Every version of you, from the girl crying in my library to the woman who walked into that ball and stopped my heart. He leans closer, close enough that our faces are inches apart, and I can see every shade of gold in his dark eyes. I want to stop lying about feeling brotherly affection when what I actually feel is possessive and consuming and nothing resembling appropriate. Lorenzo, I want to kiss you until you forget every moment I made you feel invisible. Want to touch you until the only name you remember is mine. Want to keep you so completely that my brother's dinner invitation becomes irrelevant because you're already exactly where you want to be. The raw honesty in his words breaks something inside me that's been holding on to hurt as protection, and I'm reaching for him before I consciously decide to bridge the distance. My hands fisting in his shirt as I pull him closer and finally, close the gap between us with a kiss that's been years in the making. The kiss explodes into something desperate and consuming, years of suppressed want and denied chemistry combusting into heat that makes everything else irrelevant. And his hands are in my hair and on my waist, pulling me closer while I'm trying to get purchase on shoulders that are solid muscle beneath expensive fabric. We break apart breathing hard, staring at each other with shock and desire, and the sudden realization that we've crossed a line we can never uncross. Come home with me, please, because if we stay here, I'm going to take you on this desk, and you deserve more than this place for what this moment means. His voice is broken, control hanging by a thread, and I find myself nodding before logic can intervene, because I've wanted this for so long that denying it now feels impossible. The drive to his penthouse is silent and electric. his hand finding mine in the car and holding tight, as if he's afraid I'll disappear if he lets go. When we finally arrive, he pulls me inside with barely restrained urgency, pressing me against the closed door the second it locks behind us. Tell me to stop. Tell me this isn't what you want, and I'll take you home right now. No questions, no resentment. His forehead rests against mine, his breath uneven against my lips. But if you let this happen, if we cross this line tonight, you need to understand that I don't know how to feel lightly where you're concerned. For me, it's always been all or nothing. Then stop talking and be here with me. He kisses me again, slower this time, but no less charged. His hands slide along my sides, grounding, claiming, lifting me effortlessly as he carries me toward his bedroom without breaking the kiss. The room is dark and expansive, intimidating in its quiet luxury, but the way he lays me down is careful, reverent, like this moment matters more than anything else in the world. I've imagined this so many times over the years, he murmurs. Imagined what it would feel like to finally be here with you, without walls, without pretending. His lips trace along my jaw, my neck, lingering just long enough to make my breath catch. But the reality is so much more overwhelming than anything I allowed myself to hope for. His presence surrounds me, steady and deliberate, as if he's memorizing every breath, every reaction. When he draws closer, it's unhurried, intentional, like I'm something precious, rather than fleeting. I reach for him too, needing to close the distance, needing to be sure this is real, that he's real. You have no idea how beautiful you are, he says quietly, almost like it hurts to admit it, or how much time I wasted convincing myself I was protecting you when I was really just afraid. His voice roughens, filled with emotion he can no longer hide. I won't waste another moment pretending I don't want this. Or you. Lorenzo, I whisper, my control slipping. Stop talking about what you should have done, and stay right here with me. Tell me what you need, he says softly. Tell me what makes you feel safe, what makes you feel wanted, and I won't miss it. His touch is steady, grounding, sending a quiet fire through me that makes it impossible to think straight. He doesn't rush, doesn't take. He listens, learns, responds, as if every sound I make matters. That's it, he murmurs. I just want to know you're here with me. When the last of my hesitation fades, I feel exposed in a way that has nothing to do with vulnerability of the body, and he must sense it, because he pauses, one hand lifting to my face with unexpected gentleness. We can stop, he says quietly. We don't have to do this tonight if you're not ready. I've been ready for 8 years, I tell him. Stop holding back, and just stay. He kisses me again, deeper this time, and the world narrows until there's only us. No distance, no doubt, no pretending. Everything feels inevitable, like every moment we fought this was leading right here. He moves slowly, deliberately, never looking away, as if he wants to remember every second of this. You feel unreal, he whispers, like something I dreamed up and never believed I'd be allowed to keep. His voice strains with restraint. Tell me if you need me to slow down. Tell me if you need anything. Don't stop. I breathe. I've waited too long for this. The moment stretches, deepens, until everything else fades away. His presence is steady and certain, holding me like I belong there, like I always have. When the tension finally breaks, it does so quietly, powerfully, leaving us both breathless in its wake. Afterward, the room is still except for the sound of our breathing. He draws me closer, adjusting us carefully, his arms wrapped around me in a way that feels protective rather than possessive. "Stay tonight," he says softly. I need to know this was real, not just something I imagined wanting. There's vulnerability in his voice I've never heard before. "I'll stay," I answer, "but we'll need to talk when morning comes." "It means I'm done pretending," he says, "and anyone who has a problem with that, including my brother, will have to accept it. Possessive doesn't even begin to describe you." "Not possessive," he murmurs. "Just finally honest, and completely unwilling to lose you now that I know what this feels like." He pulls me closer, and I let myself sink into the warmth of him, knowing tomorrow will bring complications, but choosing, for now, to stay in this moment where everything feels right, inevitable, and exactly what I've wanted for as long as I can remember. Chapter 7. Consequences and Conflict. I wake up to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar floor-to-ceiling windows and the immediate awareness that I'm in Lorenzo Moretti's bed, his arm wrapped firmly around my waist. And the weight of last night's choices crashes over me with equal parts satisfaction and panic, because crossing this line means there's no going back to the safe distance I'd carefully maintained for 2 years. He's still asleep beside me, face relaxed in a way I've never seen when he's awake and in control. And I take a moment to just look at him without the complication of his intense gaze tracking my every reaction. The problem with morning after clarity is that it forces you to confront decisions made in the heat of desire and emotion. And lying here in his ridiculously expensive sheets while my body still carries the quiet echo of last night, I'm struggling to figure out if last night was the beginning of something real, or just the culmination of years of unrequited want, finally finding an outlet. His arm tightens around me even in sleep when I try to shift position, and the possessiveness of the gesture would be endearing if it wasn't also slightly terrifying given that Lorenzo Moretti doesn't do casual, and I just became something he's decided belongs to him. "I can hear you thinking from here. Whatever spiral you're falling into can wait until after I've had coffee and convinced you that last night wasn't a mistake." His voice is rough with sleep, but the underlying command is still present. And when I turn to look at him, I find dark eyes watching me with an intensity that makes my breath catch, despite the anxiety churning in my stomach. "We need to talk about what this means, about what happens now that we've completely destroyed any possibility of going back to how things were before. What it means is you're mine now, and everyone else needs to adjust their expectations accordingly, including my brother, who's going to be extremely unhappy when he realizes what happened between us." He pulls me closer, morning stubble scraping against my shoulder as he presses a kiss to bare skin. "As for what happens now, I make you breakfast, and then we spend the day in this bed until you stop looking at me like you're planning escape routes." "I'm not planning escape routes. I'm processing the fact that sleeping with you was probably the worst decision I could make for my emotional well-being given our history. Or it was the best decision because it forced us both to stop pretending we don't want this." His hand slides up my side in a casual touch that somehow feels more intimate than everything we did last night. "And I know you're scared. I know I've given you every reason not to trust that this time will be different, but I'm asking you to give me the chance to prove I'm capable of being what you need." Before I can respond, his phone starts ringing with a tone that makes his entire body tense, and I watch his expression shift from vulnerable to controlled as he reaches for the device on his nightstand, clearly recognizing whoever's calling as important enough to interrupt our morning. "This is Marco. I need to take it." He kisses my forehead before answering with a curt greeting that signals he's shifted into business mode. "What's important enough to call at 7 in the morning?" I can't hear Marco's response, but I watch Lorenzo's jaw clench with that particular tightness that means he's processing information he doesn't like. And when he speaks again, his voice has gone cold in the way that suggests someone is about to have a very bad day. When did this happen? Who knows about it? And what's the current threat assessment? He listens for another moment before his eyes cut to me with something that might be concern, or possibly frustration. "I'll handle it. Give me an hour to get to the estate, and we'll discuss containment strategies. He ends the call and sits up with the sheet pooling around his waist. Running a hand through already disheveled hair in a gesture of frustration I'm starting to recognize as his tell for when things are spiraling beyond his control. Alessandro knows you're here. Apparently he showed up at your apartment this morning with coffee, and apologies for our argument, and when you didn't answer, he tracked your phone location. He tracked my phone. That's completely insane and also probably illegal. Welcome to my family where privacy is a suggestion and everyone has resources to find anyone at any time. His smile is humorless. The bigger problem is that he knows you're at my penthouse, which means he knows what happened last night. And based on Marco's report, he's currently at the estate demanding to speak with me about betraying brotherly trust and stealing what he'd claimed. I'm not something that can be claimed or stolen. I'm a person who made a choice about who I wanted to be with. I know that, and you know that. But Alessandro is going to see this as me using my position in history with you to win a competition he thinks we were having. He stands and starts pulling on clothes with efficient movements. And I need to go handle this before he does something dramatically stupid that escalates the situation beyond simple jealousy. What am I supposed to do? Just wait here like a good little possession while you deal with your brother's hurt feelings? You're supposed to stay here where you're safe and protected while I make it clear to everyone, including Alessandro, that you're not available for pursuit or negotiation. He's back in full command mode now, the vulnerable man from moments ago buried under layers of cold calculation. I'll be back within a few hours, and then we can continue our conversation about what this means and where we go from here. Lorenzo, you can't just leave after last night without actually talking about what we're doing. You can't revert to issuing commands and expecting me to obey just because we slept together. He crosses back to the bed and cups my face with both hands, forcing me to look at him directly. And what we're doing is building something real. What we're doing is me finally claiming what I should have years ago and making sure everyone knows you're off limits. His kiss is hard and possessive. Stay here. Let me handle my family. And when I get back, we'll have all the time you need to process and discuss and whatever else helps you trust that I'm serious about this. Then he's gone, leaving me alone in his massive bed surrounded by expensive sheets and the lingering scent of his cologne. And I'm faced with the choice of either obeying his command to stay or asserting my independence by leaving and dealing with the consequences. The mature adult thing would be to wait and have the conversation he's promising, but the part of me that's tired of being managed and directed is seriously considering getting dressed and going home just to prove I can. My phone buzzes with a text before I can make a decision, and when I check it, I find a message from Alessandro that makes my stomach clench with guilt and complicated feelings I don't want to examine too closely. I hope he's worth the betrayal. I genuinely thought we were building something real, but apparently I was just a convenient catalyst for his jealousy. Be careful with my brother. He's very good at making you feel like you matter until something more important demands his attention. The message sits heavy in my chest because Alessandro isn't entirely wrong. I did use his interest as leverage whether I consciously intended to or not. And now he's hurt, and I'm responsible for adding another complication to an already messy situation. I'm still staring at the text trying to figure out how to respond when my phone rings with Lorenzo's name flashing across the screen. Don't respond to Alessandro's text. Don't engage with whatever guilt trip he's attempting. Just stay where you are until I get back. How did you know he texted me? Because I know my brother and I know he's going to try to make you feel guilty for choosing me over him. His voice is tight with controlled anger. He's hurt and lashing out, which I understand. But you're not responsible for managing his emotions or apologizing for wanting me instead of him. Maybe I should apologize, though. Maybe I did lead him on by accepting his attention when I was really just trying to make you jealous. You didn't lead him on. You were honest about your complicated feelings, and he chose to pursue you anyway, hoping he could change your mind. There's a pause filled with tension. The situation here is worse than I thought. My father wants to have a family meeting about the incident at the ball, and your involvement with both his sons. Apparently, our personal drama is becoming a distraction that affects business, Your father wants to have a meeting about me. That's absolutely mortifying, and also not something I agreed to when I slept with you last night. Which is why I'm handling it. Which is why I need you to trust that I can manage my family without you having to be subjected to their judgment and interference. I'm not some fragile thing that needs protecting from your family's opinions. If they want to discuss my involvement with you, then I should be there to represent myself. Gianna, my family's meetings aren't polite discussions. They're strategic negotiations where everyone has an agenda and the person with the least power gets sacrificed for the greater good. His voice is firm. I'm not letting you walk into that situation unprepared and unprotected. So please, just this once, let me handle it my way. I want to argue, want to insist on my right to be present for conversations about my own life. But the genuine concern in his voice makes me hesitate, because maybe he's right, that walking into a Moretti family meeting without preparation would be walking into a trap I'm not equipped to navigate. Ken, fine. I'll wait. But you need to come back and actually talk to me instead of just issuing commands and expecting compliance. I promise. We'll talk about everything. Just give me a few hours to make sure my family understands that you're not negotiable. He ends the call and I'm left sitting in his bed trying to decide if trusting Lorenzo Moretti with my heart after one night together is brave or just incredibly stupid, and whether the way Alessandro's text made me feel guilty means I'm not as over the complication of two brothers as I thought I was. Chapter 8. What he always denied. The family meeting apparently goes as badly as Lorenzo predicted, based on the fact that he returns 4 hours later looking like he's aged several years and is carrying the particular tension that comes from fighting battles on multiple fronts simultaneously. I'm dressed by then and sitting in his living room with coffee I made myself because waiting naked in his bed felt too much like playing the role of obedient mistress rather than equal partner. And when he sees me fully clothed, his expression shifts into something that might be disappointment, or possibly relief, that I haven't fled entirely. You got dressed. I was hoping you'd still be in bed where I left you looking thoroughly compromised and completely mine. I'm not staying in your bed like some kept woman waiting for you to return from handling business. If we're doing this, then we're doing it as equals, which means I get to have agency over where I sit and what I wear. Fair enough. Though for the record you look significantly better naked and rumpled than you do dressed and defensive. He drops onto the couch beside me with a heaviness that suggests the meeting was worse than even he anticipated. My father thinks you're a distraction that's causing conflict between his sons and affecting family unity. Alessandro is convinced I manipulated you into my bed out of competitive spite, and half the family is taking sides in a dispute they don't actually understand because they're bored, and this is the most interesting drama we've had in years. So basically, I've become the subject of mob family gossip and political maneuvering. That's exactly what I wanted when I slept with you last night. I told them all to mind their own business, and that my personal life isn't up for family vote or approval, which went over about as well as you'd expect, with people who think they have a right to opinions about everything I do. He reaches for my hand, threading our fingers together with a gentleness that contradicts the tension in his shoulders. Alessandro is the biggest problem. He's genuinely hurt and feeling betrayed, and I can't entirely blame him, because from his perspective I waited until he showed interest, and then swooped in to claim what he was pursuing. Did you, though? Did you only want me because he wanted me first? No, I wanted you long before Alessandro ever looked at you as anything other than the girl who grew up in our house. But his interest made me confront the fact that I was going to lose you if I didn't stop being a coward about my feelings. His grip on my hand tightens. The truth is, I've been in love with you since you were 18. And it terrified me because you were supposed to be safe and protected and completely off limits. And loving you meant risking the one genuine relationship I had that wasn't contaminated by violence and obligation. So you pushed me away for years and let me think I wasn't good enough because you were scared of your own feelings. Yes, and it was selfish and cowardly and every other thing you've probably called me in your head. But I'm done running from it now, even if it means dealing with family drama and Alessandro's justified anger. What if I'm not done being angry? What if one night together doesn't erase years of hurt and rejection? Then you stay angry while I prove through consistent action that I've changed, and that this time I'm choosing you over duty and family expectations and all the excuses I used to keep you at a distance. He pulls me closer until I'm practically in his lap. I'm asking for a real chance, not forgiveness or instant trust, just the opportunity to show you that the man who pushed you away isn't the man I am now. The thing is, I want to believe him, want to trust that this is real and lasting instead of just another version of him maintaining control. But the years of hurt and disappointment make it hard to accept that he's genuinely capable of prioritizing me when his track record suggests otherwise. I need time. I need to see that you actually follow through on these promises before I can trust that this isn't just temporary insanity brought on by jealousy and desire. How much time? Give me a timeline so I know what I'm working with. I don't know. However long it takes for me to believe that you're serious about this, and not just caught up in the drama of finally getting something you thought you couldn't have. Then I'll take however long you need. I'll show up every day and prove that you're my priority until you can't deny it anymore. His kiss is soft and careful, asking rather than demanding. But I'm not giving you space or distance. I'm staying close and present, and making sure you can't forget that I'm here fighting for us. 3 months later, Lorenzo keeps his word in ways that are simultaneously annoying and endearing, showing up at my apartment every morning with coffee and refusing to leave until he's convinced I'm eating properly, inserting himself into my work schedule and social life with the determination of someone who's decided I'm his priority regardless of my protests about independence. He's still controlling and possessive and completely incapable of not managing every detail of my safety. But there's a softness now that wasn't present before, a willingness to actually listen when I push back instead of just steamrolling over my objections with commands. Alessandro remains coldly polite in the rare occasions our paths cross at family events, his hurt transformed into distant courtesy that's somehow worse than open hostility, because it means he's written me off completely as someone who betrayed whatever trust we'd been building. Lorenzo tries to repair the relationship with his brother through gestures and apologies, but the damage appears permanent, creating a rift in the family that makes everyone uncomfortable and makes me feel guilty, despite Lorenzo's insistence that I'm not responsible for managing Alessandro's emotions. Tonight is the charity gala, exactly 3 months after the ball where everything changed, and I'm getting ready in Lorenzo's penthouse because I've been spending more nights here than at my own apartment, despite my protests about maintaining separate spaces. The dress I'm wearing is deep sapphire blue that Lorenzo specifically requested because he said it matches my eyes, and when I emerge from the bedroom I find him waiting in a tuxedo that should be illegal for how well it fits. You're stunning. Every man at that gala is going to look at you and wish they were me. And you're going to spend the entire night glaring at anyone who looks too long. I know how this works by now. Absolutely. I'm extremely predictable about my possessive tendencies where you're concerned. He pulls me close for a kiss that threatens to make us late. Are you ready for this? For making our relationship public in front of the entire organization? As ready as I'll ever be, though I'm sure there will be whispers about how I manipulated both Moretti brothers. Let them whisper. Everyone who matters knows the truth about how long I've wanted you and how stubborn you were about making me work for it. The gala is exactly as overwhelming as I expected. All dangerous men in expensive suits and beautiful women dripping in jewels, and I'm hyper-aware of the attention we're drawing as Lorenzo keeps me close with his hand possessive on my lower back. Alessandro is there with a stunning brunette I don't recognize, making a point of looking completely unbothered by our presence, and I watch Lorenzo's expression tighten when he sees his brother with a date. He's trying to make a point, trying to show that he's moved on and isn't affected by us. Let him make whatever points he needs to make. We both know he's still hurt, and this is how he's coping. The evening passes in a blur of introductions and careful political navigation, Lorenzo introducing me as his girlfriend with a finality that makes it clear this isn't temporary or casual, and by the time we escape to the terrace for air, I'm exhausted from the performance of being perfectly poised under everyone's scrutiny. You were perfect in there. Handled every intrusive question and loaded comment with grace I didn't know you possessed. I learned from watching you navigate these events. though I prefer the version of you that exists in private where you're allowed to be vulnerable instead of constantly controlled. And the private version is exclusively yours. Everyone else gets the cold calculation. He turns me to face him with the city lights creating a backdrop that's almost romantic. I have something for you. Something I've been carrying around waiting for the right moment. He pulls out a small velvet box and my heart stops, because surely he's not proposing after only 3 months of actually being together. Surely he understands that I'm still figuring out if I can trust this completely. Before you panic, this isn't a proposal. I know we're not there yet, and I know you need more time to trust that I'm serious. He opens the box to reveal a delicate necklace with a pendant that catches the light. And this belonged to my mother. She left it to me with instructions to give it to the woman I knew I'd spend my life with, and I'm giving it to you now as a promise that I'm committed to proving I'm worth the risk. Lorenzo, I can't accept something that belonged to your mother when we've only been together 3 months. You can and you will, because she would have loved you, and because I need you to have something that shows everyone, including my family, that you're permanent in my life. He removes it from the box and fastens it around my neck with careful hands. I consider it a promise of intent, not pressure for commitment you're not ready to give. The weight of it against my skin feels significant in ways I'm not ready to process. And when I look at him, I see vulnerability beneath his usual confidence that makes my chest ache with complicated feelings. And what happens if I break your heart? What happens if I decide I can't trust you enough to fully commit? Then I'll live with that consequence and know I at least tried to be worthy of you instead of spending the rest of my life wondering what if. His kiss is interrupted by the sound of breaking glass from inside the ballroom, and suddenly, we're running back inside to find chaos and Alessandro standing over someone with blood on his knuckles and murder in his eyes. Epilogue. 6 months later, turns out Alessandro hadn't moved on nearly as well as he'd pretended, and the man he'd beaten at the gala was someone who'd made comments about me being a prize fought over by brothers, which triggered something in Alessandro that resulted in him hospitalizing the guy and creating a scandal that the family is still managing. Lorenzo had handled it with unexpected grace, defending his brother publicly, while privately telling him that violence over perceived insults to me wasn't helping anyone, and was just making the situation messier. The relationship between the brothers remained strained but functional, with Alessandro maintaining cold politeness that occasionally cracks into genuine conversation when he forgets to be angry. I've stopped feeling guilty about choosing Lorenzo, because Alessandro's made it clear through his actions that his interest was at least partly about competition with his brother. And the woman he's been seeing consistently for the past few months suggests he's genuinely moving on rather than just performing recovery. Lorenzo proposed properly last month after 9 months of consistently showing up and proving he meant every promise he'd made. And I'd said yes because somewhere in all the daily proof and consistent presence, I'd started to actually believe he was capable of prioritizing me. The ring currently sitting on my finger is elegant and understated, exactly what I would have chosen for myself if he'd asked. And the fact that he knew that without me telling him is proof of how much attention he's been paying. The wedding is set for next spring, small and intimate despite his family's protests that it should be a massive production. And I'm standing in his penthouse watching him handle business calls with the kind of cold efficiency that used to intimidate me, but now just makes me appreciate how he can compartmentalize between the dangerous man the world sees and the vulnerable person he is with me. He catches me watching and ends his call abruptly, moving to pull me close with hands that are gentle despite their capacity for violence. What are you thinking about so seriously? I'm thinking about how far we've come from that night at the ball when you saw me with Alessandro and finally admitted what you'd been running from. Best night of my life, despite how badly it started. Watching you walk in with my brother made me realize I was done lying to myself about what I wanted. And what about Alessandro? Do you think he'll ever fully forgive us? Eventually, maybe. My brother holds grudges, but he also loves family. And once he's genuinely moved on, he'll come around. Lorenzo's smile is slightly wicked, though watching him punch someone for insulting you suggested he still has complicated feelings about the whole situation. That was him being overprotective, not romantic. If you say so. My phone buzzes with a text, and I glance at it reflexively. surprised to see Alessandro's name flashing across the screen with a message I'm almost afraid to read given our history. Congratulations on the engagement. I'm genuinely happy for you both, even if it took me a while to get here. Also, fair warning, I'm bringing someone to the wedding who I'm actually serious about, so prepare yourself for family commentary about both Moretti brothers being domesticated. I show Lorenzo the message and watch his expression shift from surprise to something that might be relief that his brother is finally reaching out with something resembling warmth instead of cold politeness. He's moving on. Actually moving on this time instead of just performing recovery. Good. Maybe now family events will be less awkward. Don't count on it. We're Italian and dramatic. Awkward is our default setting even when everyone's happy. He kisses me thoroughly. The kind of kiss that usually leads to us abandoning whatever plans we had in favor of staying in. And when we break apart, we're both smiling because despite all the complications and drama and years of denial, we somehow ended up exactly where we were always supposed to be. Together, finally honest, and building something real from the ashes of everything we almost destroyed through fear and pride and stubborn refusal to admit what we both wanted. The end.